Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to season 2 of Conversations in Pop Culture, where I have with me returning guest Ryan Cummins, who was back on in season 1. So, welcome back.
What's up, man? Glad to be back.
Nothing much, nothing much. So, how's the impact last week, right?
Right?
That's an inside joke. We were speaking about a little bit before about how people don't actually talk about your latest Kickstarter that you have going on, and not to embarrass every other podcast, but we do talk about the book here. And you do have a Kickstarter going on. It's called Fever Volume 1. It's a graphic novel. You got, I think, 25 plus days left on the Kickstarter. So if you didn't back it, no pressure, but back it now. And so it's a crazy book, I think it is a good way to put it. So what is the basic premise of the book? Because you're going to describe better than I will.
Fever, Volume 1 is the first in hopefully a planned series of graphic novels. But it's mostly an action-adventure, cyberpunk genre type of book. It's about a man who was a hitman, tried to get away from the life. He ran off with the boss's daughter, basically, and that had tragic repercussions. And then we pick up right from there, and it goes off the rails very quickly.
So obviously we're going to get into the book. We're going to talk about all sorts of stuff. Obviously, I just wanted the entry point here, and where did this idea come from? Because there's a bunch of stuff that this comes out of. 100 Bullets is an old school book. It's a really cool concept. If you haven't read 100 Bullets, it's one of those books. Obviously, Cyberpunk 2077 is really big right now. Blade Runner, elements of that are sort of thrown into this as well. And there's a few other things. Obviously, I referenced and shot you a message about Bang Tango. There's stuff in there with Adrian Sabar and Joe Kelly, and that's an old book. And so there's a lot of stuff in here that's coming out of old school comics and also some topical things that are currently going on, such as Cyberpunk 2077 and even Old Boy to some degree. And Old Boy is getting like a graphic novel, and there's some stuff going on with Old Boy that I don't know. So where did the entire premise for all this come out? Because it is new school versus old school comics and even new ideas and old ideas.
Yeah, the story's nothing new at all. You referenced Old Boy. That's one of my favorites. And it's, like I said, the story is nothing new, but I wanted to put a new twist on it. And each of my stories that I write, I like to dig in, make it a little bit personal. And one day I was just sitting there thinking, I'm like, how would I like to navigate this world? Or how would I personally navigate this world? And so a lot of the stuff that I wrote down early on was just, hey, throw this guy into a situation, what would I do? And then get out of it. So, but basically it's cyberpunk. I wanted to do something in a cyberpunk genre. There's not a lot of cyberpunk comic books out there. I think the last year we started to see more and more pop up, but I wanted to do the revenge tale, but in a genre and in a way that hasn't been done in comics, at least in a long time, or not at the level where we are.
Yeah, and to even dive into it, because I think that is something to talk about. So obviously the backdrop of this is that the year is 2082. Mega corporations sort of run everything. Crime syndicates have massive control in cities. Obviously, there's government is still around, but they are very much powerless, I think is a safe assumption. And where we pretty much have sort of laws don't really apply because corporations are running everything and things of that nature. And so this and it's an entire scene and the background in the city is a character in of itself. And I think that's the best place to start with this, because we're taking a lot of elements of cyberpunk and neo-noir and this dark position. I don't know if you've read the Legend series. And that sort of there's a division in the two cities, and one of them is completely run by corporate, as a corporate entity, and very much if you don't pay your taxes that the corporations are collecting, you don't get services. And so it's a very cool thing where this is a very cool setting that is a character in of itself that sort of sets the entire world. So what was that like building out this world? Because the world is new in many ways versus the concept.
The concept is nothing new at all. I'm a huge Judge Dredd fan, 2000 AD fan. When you read this first volume, we don't even name the city. So it's a very intimate story where we follow the main character. So we're in his neighborhood mostly. The neighborhood is called 40 Block, and that's just that, for lack of a better term, ghetto block section of there's no law, there's no, it's basically just a lawless country. But I didn't want it to be a worldwide story. I didn't want it to be a commentary on the world as a whole. I wanted to follow this one man's journey, and that's where we pick up, and that's, at least in this first volume, that's where we are. But the city is just, it's beautiful. Ricardo is doing some of the best work I've ever seen him do, and he sent me just concept art for the city, and I was blown away.
And even to talk about that, because the reason why, what I was trying to get across, and I don't know if I hit it the right way here, but it's this idea that this city can be any city in reality.
Exactly.
It's more along the lines where it's a futuristic. We have certain colors. Obviously, we have intricate parts of this city, and we understand that the city breathes, and this is what I mean by the city being a character, where the city has made a lot of these people to some degree, and their environment has made them, and their environment, and they're sort of playing on its playground, and it's a very cool concept, very much like Cyberpunk 2077. That entire video game, for those who have played it or have not played of it but heard of all the glitches in the game, obviously it's a very, the city in Cyberpunk is a very, very much a character in the game. And that's how I feel about this comic book in particular, is that we have character and we have traits to the city. And I think it's really interesting because not every story gets to do that, where you actually feel in this city. And when Marcus is walking around, and when, his wife is referenced, or when they run out of it, you actually understand why, and how the city is not the good guy per se. It's very much a crime-infested city. And I don't know how to describe it any other way, but it's very cool to build that concept up.
And like you said, the city is a character in its own right, but it's a stranger. So we will uncover more and more and discover more about the city as we go. And like, back to your point, the new characters that will come in and show up, you'll see how they were brought up by the city and the city's influence on them.
And then even to go further into this, because what makes this interesting is that we have Marcus Shaw, who is that hitman. Yeah. And obviously he has been raised in very much a ghetto block, in a very much crime neighborhood. And I guess his entire theory, and I'm sure we're going to get his backstory in this issue or another issue or going forward, but probably his only escape was to go to crime. Yeah. Which I think is, for a lot of people in this city, that's the option, or to go the corporate route and sort of handle it that way, which means you're still going into crime because all the corporations are committing crime in this.
Yep.
And that's how they're getting power, and through crime syndication. And so obviously he has probably killed a bunch of people in the past. He's made a bunch of enemies. And so what was this like in really building out this character? Because we're going to get into some of the revelations he has and all those choices, because he does make a lot of interesting life choices that then lead to secondary and tertiary and so on and so forth choices. But what was that like building him up? Because while this concept necessarily isn't, new, his version of things and his choices and his decisions are.
Right. So Marcus is an outsider. He was brought in young by the Nakagawa family. The Nakagawa family are one of the biggest corporations in America. They're not at the top, but they're getting there, and they're fighting for that spot. And early on, Goro, the head of the Nakagawa family, would bring teenage boys off the street, and he'd enlist them into his street army, as you would say. And he ran the corporation like a crime syndicate, basically. And so you think 10, 15 plus years of these young boys off the street doing crime and doing these hits and these murders and basically being a street soldier for Goro. In Marcus's case, that takes a toll on him. Here's an orphan who was handed a life, a very good life, and he one day decided to throw it all away and give it up and walk away from it. And as you said, there are repercussions to that.
And then obviously one of the choices he makes is that he falls in love with Goro's daughter. And before we get into that decision, we do have to talk about Goro a little bit because Goro cares about a few things. He's a very simple man. Obviously, he wants his corporation to be the best. He wants power. I'm sure he likes money. I'm sure he likes his lavish lifestyle. And he also loves his daughter, Yori. I think that's how you say her name, right?
Yori, yep.
And so now, and also the thing is that this is an American city, but Goro is Japanese.
Yes.
For those who don't know. So one of the things that's going on is that, well, that's what he loves. And then Yori winds up falling in love with Marcus, and then they flee the city. And they want to escape. And they get married. And I'm not spoiling anything. I think it's pretty clear that's on the Kickstarter.
That's all in the first page.
Spoiler. This is like in the first few pages of the book.
Yep.
This has legitimately nothing to do with the book. What Marcus does after has to do with the story. I want to make that perfectly clear. I'm not spoiling anything for those who are interested. So how did that relationship go and even start? Because I think that's something that is super interesting where they obviously fall in love. They're from two different lifestyles. And then they both have an awakening, and they both want to make the choice to leave this world of crime, and they want better, and they don't want part of the fuckery that's going on. Because, and there's a lot of thought process behind that, where either Marcus is sick of it, Yori is sick of all the killing. They want better, and they don't want a part of it. They realize where this ends. Because if you keep climbing up, I'm sure there's another crime syndicate that is as equal, as powerful as Goro's, that has just as much resources or might want to suppress. And so what prompted that decision? Because that's a major life decision to be made. And obviously it has a massive effect on what happens after.
So there's a lot to unpack in what you just said.
It's a very adult situation.
Yeah.
And the reason why I ask this is because obviously I don't want you to give away everything, but I'm getting the point that this is very complex, and that obviously Marcus is not some street punk ghetto kid out of nowhere. Obviously he's caught into a very complicated situation and a very adult situation where he's making a life choice by marrying Yori. And if he married Yori and they stayed in the city, Goro might not be happy, but he wouldn't, wouldn't end the way it ended with her being killed.
Yeah. I can't talk about her being killed, but I can go into
we know she gets
a little bit.
Right?
Yeah. We're not gonna go past that. So I'll get into Goro real quick. Goro is not a typical bad guy. He's not, I'm out to own everything. I'm not an evil person.
Just wants to be respected.
Yeah, the way Goro has a struggle of his own. I think the best villains are.
He wasn't raised well. His mother never treated him appropriately. There's one too many spankings.
He never got to watch Impact on Wednesdays.
Yeah.
So the thing for me is I learned this from watching Game of Thrones. Is the best bad guys don't think they're the bad guys, right? The world is gray, and the basis for this book was for me to explore loss and explore blame, and to an extent revenge. I over the last few years have been struggling with losing a friendship, and I don't know if you've ever broken up with a friend. But it was
very explosively.
Very
explosively.
Yep.
Not over.
Yeah.
I got a few more shots to take.
Yeah. Oh God.
When one of my friends gets married, it's going to be very interesting, and I'm sure that it's not going to come to fists because one of us will end up in jail or be in trouble for animal abuse, and it's not going to be him.
We'll come back to that one in a future episode.
Hey! I just took it from CM Punk. What can I say? That's all right.
Right. Oh yeah. But no, my thing was the relationship that I had that ended was, I feel he wronged me. He feels I wronged him, and now we've never had a dialogue because screw that. I don't do that. So the more and more I thought about it and the more I struggled with it, I'm like, okay, this guy wronged me. I shouldn't have to be the one to stop. He should pay. And I thought about it and thought about it. I'm like, that's a great idea for a story. And the more I thought of it, like, what could work in that? What plot device could push somebody that way in a fantastical story? And that's the first thing I thought of: forbidden love. The street soldiers know they are not allowed to even look at Yori, and she knows she's above everyone else. She's not allowed to look down. So if these two people fall in love, and then tragically something happens to her, you have Marcus, who blames Goro for her death because it was his soldiers, maybe. And then you have Goro, who blames Marcus because it was Marcus had her killed, maybe. You don't know. So it's basically the fight between these two men. It's not a he's the good guy, he's the bad guy, he's right or he's wrong. It's exploring how both of these men are blaming the other for this travesty that's happened to them.
And to even go on to that, because it also, I mean, it's pretty clear that she gets killed on their honeymoon also.
Yeah.
And so obviously the stakes are raised. It's not like, Marcus is getting milk and she gets shot and killed.
Right.
It's very obvious that this is an intentional hit. Now, where we know this hit is coming from, that's up for debate, that's up for discussion, that's up for analyzing. But clearly, when you're killing somebody on somebody's honeymoon, it's very much an intentional act. It's not an accidental killing, for lack of a better word. It's not a hit goes wrong.
Right.
It's obviously the hit went wrong because everybody, I think it's pretty safe that Goro and Marcus both lost something on this hit, but it's also this idea that the hit was intentional by whomever, or possibly by both parties to some degree.
Yeah.
As well. Or there's a third possibility, because you never know.
You never know.
And if anybody's read Bang Tango, they understand that there's a third possibility that's very possible in that story. And that story is brilliant on what it does, because that is a left turn spun upside down, reshot into, and the chamber's cocked and ready to fire. That's how I describe Bang Tango's ending.
And anybody who's read my other work knows I like to throw little curveballs in there too. So
let's just say Joe Kelly can write. Let's just say that. And I don't know if you read Bang Tango, but if you read Bang Tango, you understand why I love Bang Tango, and B, what Bang Tango and why it's so similar to this book. It's so similar with all the twists and plots and everything that's brilliant, and the unexplored territory it goes into. So obviously there's a lot of stuff that can happen in this. There's a lot of positioning that can happen in this. This is why we're talking about it, because I'm trying to. I have an idea where it's going. I have an idea. It's because the basic concept is that, and then to go even further, because the basic concept is that, well, Marcus wants revenge and Goro wants to eliminate Marcus, and there's a whole bunch of people who are sort of caught in the middle of this war between two men. So that's kind of where this is going, and what happens next is going to be very, very exciting. And one of the things that I kind of also like about this book is that it is very violent. It's hyper violence.
Yeah.
It's very much a over the top vibe with it as well, where the violence and the extremity is something that is, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I like extreme violence. I think violence is very important sometimes. And I think it works. It's much like, and I know you're a wrestling fan, I'm a huge deathmatch wrestling fan.
Yes. Yep.
I love deathmatch wrestling. I think it's actually more storytelling than regular wrestling.
Yep.
Sometimes.
If it's done correctly. If you got the right guys in there,
If you put, the Matt Tremont Akira match at ICW, brilliant match. Entire thing, John Wade Murdoch versus Orin Veidt, brilliant match. Those two going at it.
See, I'm old school. I'm talking Mick Foley, Cactus Jack when he was wrestling over in Japan, like barbed wire ring ropes in the C4, like not the watered down Mick Foley or the stuff we see on Dynamite now, which is good, but I'm talking like old school stuff. I saw a dude get stabbed with a broken light tube, not just hit with one.
You have not seen like old school Matt Tremont. Good stuff. Good stuff. Guy brought deathmatch wrestling back to America. Brilliant guy. But we're so off topic here. So off topic. This had nothing to do with Fever.
Well, we'll have to do a wrestling episode one day.
Yeah, perhaps when I run out of content for this.
Yeah, right.
Well, to even go into this further, because obviously this is very hyper-violence, and I like to see stories told with extreme violence and hyper-violence because this story needs it, and it makes sense, and it's appropriate in a lot of ways. And so what was that like, bringing that into this too? Because it fits into, obviously, the war between Marcus and Goro. Fits into the cyberpunk neo-noir, the city being a very dirty, very fucked up place, very much a crime breeding ground. We talk about, circumstances and settings. This is the perfect setting for hyperviolence.
Yeah.
And obviously we have corporations vying for power. We have people vying for power, because I don't know if you get into this too much in the book per se, but obviously there's politics going on between corporations, and there's a variety of other stuff where the only threat Goro is not dealing with is Marcus. I'm sure he has other external pressures from other corporations, and I'm sure that foot soldiers get taken out all the time. And, well, Goro's probably not going to deal with Marcus first, and there might be other corporations that don't want a piece of Marcus or might want to encourage Marcus to some degree. And obviously when you have hyperviolence, and then, well, this is how you're going to solve all your problems, because there's no government to deal with this or keep you in check, and the only thing that's going to keep you in check is a knife, a gun, or whatever other weapon you can get your hands on. So
in this book, a lot of times it's your bare hands. How do I say this? You hit the nail on the head. There's no point where it's just Marcus versus Goro and his goons. There's so much going on. I actually had to expand the story a little bit in a couple of the chapters, because it called for bigger scenes and to flesh out those scenes. We have an 11-page car chase in issue 2, and I expanded it because it needed to be bigger. It needed to tell a bigger story than just Marcus going and killing some guys.
So before we even get too far, because I don't want to talk about that car chase.
Oh, no, I'm not. No, there's surprises in there.
No. When you say issue, because this is a graphic novel.
So yeah, it's a graphic novel, and it's broken into chapters. So each.
I don't want to confuse people, because this is gets confusing, because most people on Kickstarter do not fund a graphic novel. Graphic novels on Kickstarter tend to happen later on. Most people fund a single issue or a double issue. This is a graphic novel, and so when you break it up, when you say issue 2, are you talking about chapter 2?
Yeah, see, and I wrote it all as to be released in issue form, and then we just decided, hey, with timing and everything, when trying to lock the artist down, we're just going to do a graphic novel. So that's the mistake I keep making, is calling the chapters issues.
Because it gets confusing, and this is something that I want to make sure people understand, that you're not buying 24 pages at a $25 price point. You're buying like 4 issues worth of content, or 5 issues, or 6 issues worth of content, and you're getting a big chunk of the story. And obviously all this stuff is being broken up, and obviously I'm not going to dive too much into the card chase per se, but what is that like? Because obviously on a graphic novel you have a lot more freedom to say, okay, look, if we only have 160 pages, that's okay, but if we can also add 8 pages in, or we could add 4 more pages in, because you're not confined per se to issue count and to backer count and to monetary count, because to produce a 168 page or 164 page graphic novel isn't much in a difference of price.
Right. Well, and for us, like, I'm my own boss basically. I don't have somebody saying, hey, I need this issue every month at this page count. So I try to stick to between 22 and 26, but this book has like a special air to it. And I just said, you know what, we're just going to throw everything at it that we can.
And also graphic novels, because they're a bigger piece of a story, they have a lot more freedom. And you can also do things, because if you were releasing this in a single issue, and correct me if I'm wrong, one of the things that you might have an issue that's 20 pages, and you might have an issue that's 32 pages.
Yeah.
And while the entire thing might be 168 pages for the entire first arc of the story over 6 issues, not everything is going to be, nicely tied up.
Right.
And that happens sometimes. I mean, there's people who have irregular issues, and that's okay. But it also, people feel like saying, "Wait a second, I just spent $15 for an issue and I got 20 pages. Like, what the fuck?"
Yeah.
First thing, then they get the next month they get 40 pages, and like, this is great for the same price point. Yep. And then the third issue they get 25 pages, and like, wait a second, I got 40 pages last month. But when it's all in a graphic novel, it's obviously, you could have a chapter that has 22 pages and you could have one that has 40.
Yeah.
And it feels like they got screwed.
Yeah, and it's another thing too is the graphic novel is it's so much easier to transport. Like I will take a comic book, like a trade, to work with me, or take it on a vacation with me, whereas I'm not going to bring a box of comics with me,
And also, I would imagine pacing is much easier than a graphic novel.
Yes.
Because you have the entire thing done.
Yep.
And so now you don't have to worry too much saying, "Oh man, I got to end on a cliffhanger."
Yeah.
Because technically you could end chapter 1 of this book with X, and then it picks up right after, and you don't have to worry about those cliffhangers, which frees up writing. Unfortunately, when you read Batman, if anybody read Batman Second Son, ends on a pretty big cliffhanger. And they need to do that, so you buy it the next month.
Yep.
And you buy it the next month, and you buy the final 4th issue. First thing, if that's in a gigantic trade paperback, obviously DC's not going to modify the comic, but if it was released as a 4-parter graphic novel, then they don't need to do it and write it the same way.
Yeah, it's from the television model. It's you wanna have people coming back for the next episode and for the next issue. The thing with that is if you have a dull spot in the story, then that issue is going to be a dull issue. Nope, there went my $4 or $5. Every issue can't be at 100. And this is a limited series that we're doing, so there are going to be ups and downs and ebbs and flows to it. So, but I think we nailed it. I think each chapter that we've done is like on 100%.
Yeah, and I also think it's this idea that issues are not competing with each other.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that's a big issue with comics, is that issues compete with each other. I mean, I'm in the spec game. I apparently missed out, and technically I didn't miss out. I'm trying to figure out my finances to get into the entire Spider-Man 25, Miles Morales, Clone Wars stuff that's going on, which is super, super complicated. That entire spec mark, but obviously number 26 is going to be interesting what happens with that. There's a really cool variant that I actually just picked up on it, pays homage to Ultimate Fallout 4. Nice. It's an awesome book that just came out and how it looks. But the idea is that with a graphic novel in these 4 or 5, or I don't know how many chapters are in this book. I should probably ask that question before I make any argument here. But the idea of what I'm going for here is that issue 2 or chapter 2 is not competing with chapter 3.
Right.
And so people can actually get a good sense of the story and actually get a good bite of the apple of what this is about. And that's a big problem. And I would also imagine that it released some stuff for you as well, where it's like, okay, people are reading, 100+ pages of this, and they're actually getting a decent size of the story, and they're not having to wait every other month. Yeah. Or because shit can happen to artists. It happens all the time, Mike Tenner, and one of the things that he just expanded Black Jackets from 6 to 8. Yeah. And speaking about this, and because he expanded it, and I think it's the right move from what I know and what he told me, but all of a sudden, his artist could die on issue 7. And I don't wish his artist to, obviously, that's not what we're doing here, but when you're running a project where you're releasing only 2 issues a year, and it's going to take you an additional year, and you still have half the series to get through. So you have 2 more or 3 more years because they're on issue 3. So they have approximately 5 more Kickstarters to run. In that time frame, it's a big risk. But if you have the entire thing released all at once, now, if you're doing 3 volumes, there's still that risk. But if you release all 3 volumes once a year, you completed the story in
Yep.
3 years versus doing it in, segments that way.
Yeah, exactly. And that was another big reason for us deciding to do it as a graphic novel instead. I have 3 other projects that I've done that haven't seen the light of day. They probably never will, because the first issue got done and then the artist moved on. It's an artist is always busy. There's always somebody, hey, I got this book. And I'm really bad about not wanting my books or my series to have a different artist every issue. I had that happen with Rumble Kings. And I knew that for Fever, there was nobody else could do this book the way that Ricardo does. So the decision was easy. Let's just do it all at once. We're trying to fund a much bigger goal than I'm used to. So we're like shooting for the moon on this, but it's going to be worth it. What we have written, the ideas he has that he's bringing to the forefront, even what we have planned for a volume 2, like Lord willing, we get to do it. He's come with ideas. Hey, I want to do this. And it's amazing, So hopefully this is successful and I never have to let Ricardo work with anybody else ever again.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, is that unfortunately artists move on, and locking down an artist for a 6-issue series, especially if you're releasing one every 3 months, is super, super difficult.
Yep, or once a year. Like an artist can't do 1 book a year. It's insane.
And so it's super difficult, and also the fact that if you say, hey, here's my script, we got 120 pages, have at it, and then you're giving them work for a while, and then, obviously if you say, hey, it's going to take me another 4 months to write this script, and then in 4 months I'm going to need you to do this thing again, or while this thing is getting funded, you start handing them more pages and more pages and more pages, obviously getting artists, and this is why art teams change so frequently. And this is why, it's very interesting when art teams stay together on big books like Marvel and DC, because, there's always, artists are always needed, per se, and not every artist is good at being a professional. Not every writer is good at being a professional. There are plenty of people who get removed from books in Marvel and in DC, and it's because they can't get their scripts in on time.
Yep.
Happens all the time, and it's crazy.
And God forbid, you're in between issues and somebody comes up with another idea. Like, hey, you want to do a Cyberpunk revenge book? Like another one? And then your artist goes off and does that. And you're just kind of like, well, okay, now what do I do?
Or I'll give you a better scenario. What happens if, Ricardo gets a call from DC or Marvel?
Yeah.
I forget who I was speaking to. But he had an artist, Jerry Gaylord, did his first books and worked on like 1 or 2 or 3 of his books, and then he got called up for Boom Studios, and I think Jerry has done work for Marvel or DC, and so all of a sudden, what is Jerry supposed to say? Hey, well, I can't really go with you guys. I got to finish this indie project. Now, I think if you're on the last issue and you have 10 pages left and it's issue 6, I think DC and Marvel would understand on an indie series where that should be finished. But if you're in the middle and you're between issues 3 and 4 and your artist gets called from Marvel or DC making some serious money, or gets offered by another writer an Image book, that also happens. It happens a lot more frequently than people understand. So obviously that's a big issue. And let's be realistic. Everything is being pulled out of the indies. I mean, you're a wrestling fan.
Yep.
How many independent wrestlers have got signed to WWE in the last 8 months?
God, so many. Holy cow.
And to AEW and to Impact.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So my point that I'm trying to make is that if that's happening with wrestling, it's also happening with indie comics.
Oh, yeah.
Where a bunch of people, but then again, a bunch of people don't want to go that route because they're making good money outside of that too. I mean, and I'll ask you a question. I'm not going to hate to put you on the spot, but if Image offered you a contract for this book, would it be something you would consider?
If the deal was right. The that I love Image. That's my childhood right there. But
You consider it, right?
I would consider it. Of course, I would consider it.
That's my point. Is
yeah,
that
of course.
My point is that all of a sudden, indie stuff does get picked up.
Yeah,
it gets picked up a lot more than people realize, and plenty of projects, plenty of creators, plenty of companies are seeking out people on the indies, and I think it's about to become a lot more prevalent. And also, especially with Diamond now needing better content, and they're obviously a distributor, and obviously DC is with Lunar, Scouts with Lunar. Marvel, October 1st is the date when it's going to be very interesting with Penguin Random House.
Oh yeah.
That's the date. It's going to be super interesting what happens with that and where that goes and how that affects shops and everything. And you're going to see a lot of movement come July with all that stuff because it's going to be beyond fascinating. So obviously I bring that up because, well, obviously you got your artist locked down for a good chunk, and then if all of a sudden your artist changes in volume 2, well, at least that new artist has a bunch of time for the next 120, 160 pages.
Yeah. Well, and you can look at it to make the comparison. Indie comics is a lot like indie wrestling. A big company doesn't want to. There's no money in making talent. The guys on the indies build up, become superstars in their own right, and then they move up. It happens all the time. Marvel's not going to come to you, grab an artist, and teach them how to draw, teach them how to do storytelling. They want to find the guys at the top of their game on the indies and bring them up. Same thing happens with wrestling all the time. Look at NXT went from doing like homegrown talent to rating ROH and bringing in all their already made stars. That's just the way of the world. If Marvel came in,
ROH, they're not rating ROH. They're rating
not anymore.
They're rating Beyond.
Yep.
They're rating Limitless. They're rating places like partially ROH, and they're really taken out of the indies. It's insane. There's all these great companies that have legitimately been gutted, and then when they get gutted, they bring up the next crop, and then when they get gutted again, they bring up the next crop because all these companies, New England is a big breeding ground for WWE. It's a big breeding ground, and I can legitimately name the next 10 wrestlers in the next 10 years who are going to be killing it in WWE.
But you see what my point is, though, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's so true.
And those guys aren't going to stay on the indies forever. There's a couple guys, and in indie comics, it's the same way. There's guys who just want to do this, but in our case, if Marvel came to Ricardo and said, hey, we want you, come over here and do this Avengers book, I'm not stopping them. We'll figure out whatever happens to our books together, but you have to do what's good for you, And Marvel getting a call up to Marvel or DC is way different than just grabbing some Joe Schmo who wants to do a Kickstarter like I'm doing. You know what I mean? That I might have some feelings about.
And so obviously it's very interesting, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this in 1 second. But I do want to finally talk about the fact that how far is Marcus going to go? if you want to reveal all this, because clearly he kills a few people in issue 1, in volume 1. I know he does. I know there's some fights. I have some scenes from it. I think this is a something that's going on with that. This is something that's also going on a little bit with what's going on, and then there's some other stuff that winds up happening. So how far is Marcus willing to go? How far is Goro willing to go? And how far is this city going to drag everybody down with it? If you want to give us an idea.
Yeah, I can tell you Marcus and Goro are willing to go all the way. That is a big plot point, actually, in both their cases for this first volume, is how far they're willing to go and how those around them are going to suffer for it. And to a greater extent, in Goro's case, how the city is going to suffer because of that.
Yeah,
the reason I chose the cyberpunk genre is early on I was just rambling while I'm driving around, and the words Bloodsoaked Neon just popped into my head. like, oh, that'd be like a cool, you know, like band name or blah blah blah. And the more I thought about it, I'm like, how beautiful is that? You got these bright neon lights and then just gratuitous violence over top of it. And that's where, like you said, with the gratuitous violence in this book, that's where it comes from. Like there's a beauty to the city and there's just an ugly, harsh reality to it as well, like a brutality.
Yeah, it's gonna be a very 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 violent, and very very bloody, and all sorts of shenanigans.
I even have to push Ricardo. There are times where he's sent me back in fight scenes and the action is it's beautiful, it's stylistic, but the action would happen off panel. And I had to pull him back and be like, no, we need to show this. There are scenes we show the brutality and then we show the beauty as well from in different scenes. So there has to be a good balance to that.
And I'll give a good example of this. So this is a very beautiful scene right here. And obviously that's Marcus, that's Yori. I think it's pretty clear who's who. Yep. And obviously this is a very beautiful, very tranquil, very peaceful, very romantic scene. But then we get a scene like this where clearly this is a much more violent scene, and obviously I don't know the full extent of this scene per se. I'm sure that when people read the book, they're going to know exactly what happened, but I think it's pretty clear that this is a lot more violent than the other scene. And so obviously you get a very nice blend where you get a beautiful artwork, you get beautiful scenes, you get very peaceful, very, romantic, very, we made it type of attitude. But then we also get that extreme violent, and that this is a fight, and that this is not a friendly situation. Right. It's a hostile situation. And so I'm not going to push you too further on that. But obviously, I know that Fever wasn't this book's first name.
No.
I'm pretty sure I know what company might have not been a fan of you, and I don't know if you want me to say it, but
you could say whatever you want. I'm going to be a little tight-lipped about the subject.
I know that Vault Comics has a book called Heavy.
Yeah.
And so obviously, and then also Heavy, Metal Magazine also gets very defensive. Yeah. And obviously Heavy Metal's been around for a long time, and there's a lot of people who write for Heavy Metal Magazine. Obviously Vault Comics, I like Vault Comics. I think Vault Comics does some cool stuff. They have really cool people. They're a cool company out there that's doing cool stuff. David Booher, who does Canto, used to write for them and did a bunch of cool stories for them. So obviously when somebody goes and invents a comic and they have their idea, and even though it might not be the exact same story, it might be a completely different story, there's issues of trademarks that happen, and issues of confusion, and people get defensive, and if somebody gets there first, sometimes that happens.
Yep.
And also money dictates things too.
Yeah.
Where if I have $100,000 and I'm willing to fight you tooth and nail for it, sometimes people say, you know what, I'll just back off.
Yeah. Yeah, it's big guy versus little guy in some situations. I was dead set on Heavy. I had that name forever. I loved that name. I had to delete all the graphics of it off of my computer because I kept accidentally almost loading those onto Facebook. But Fever came to me in almost the same fashion. And the more I read the scripts, I'm like, okay, this isn't just a replacement. Like I can weave this into the story as well. So it worked out well, and I'm very happy with where we're at right now.
And so I wanted to bring that up because I don't think we're disparaging them.
No.
Things happen in that way, and obviously people protect their intellectual property, which is kind of crazy because if you go look at a bunch of other comics, there's been literally 19 comics of the same name, and it's just one of those things where sometimes companies don't care, and other times they really do care. And this was one of the times that obviously Vault gave a shit about. But also Vault has put a lot of money into Heavy. Yeah. They've hired like Yoshi Yatana, I think, and she's really good at what she does, and all sorts of cool stuff that way. So, but we're not gonna press too hard because I don't want to get sued by them, and I do want to speak to them at some point. So, I'm sure that I'll bring this up to them, and we'll have a nice, lovely conversation about it on their end. But I digress. I tend to get myself in trouble, everybody. I'm just saying. So I do want to talk about the rewards before we get back to talking about Kickstarter and the indies and pulling out all that stuff. A lot of cool rewards coming out with it. So obviously there's a bunch of digital stuff that's coming out with this. There's the digital deluxe. So what is the difference between those two? Because that's a new thing in Kickstarter to me, where there's always been digital stuff out there, but now there's always a digital deluxe that's being added into it. And I don't really get the concept of it. But what's the difference between? I mean, I know what's in the deluxe. I know what's in the regular.
Yeah.
That entire theory and what is the difference between the two?
Before Kickstarter started doing add-ons, it was just another tier to get a little bit extra. As you know, some people will overprice their rewards. I've seen a lot of overpriced digital stuff. And I'm like, okay, somebody may just want the book. There are people out there that don't care about pinups. They don't care about exclusives or anything. So in our case, it was, here's just the book, just the story itself, digital, that's fine. But there are other people that also like exclusive pinups and creator interviews, stuff like that. So that's, for us, that's where we came up with the, okay, let's do a digital deluxe. Add a little extra to it for them.
Yeah, and so there's the digital stuff, and then I think there's also like the whole digital package, which has some Rumble Kings and some other stuff you've done. So that's also out there as well, and that's a version that's out there. And then, there's the standard hardcover. So I think that this is sort of the standard.
I think that's the standard soft cover, just the regular floppy trade. Cover. Yep. We have a variant, and then we have a hardcover.
So that's the variant. So who did the variant? I mean, it's Francesco Tomaselli.
Yep, gorgeous work. Let's see. He does black jackets for that awful Mike Tenner guy. And even with that one, I'm really big on pinups. So in this one, you'll get your digital pinup pack, which is 9 exclusive pinups by some amazing artists. Like I said, I'm a big pinup guy, and we even have a physical copy. Like, just put them all in frames and hang them in your house. They're gorgeous.
And then there's some other stuff too. So then there's the hardcover, and that's obviously the hardcover bundle too.
Yeah.
And so that has a bunch of stuff in it. And then there's the regular hardcover bundle. Should have done it in order, but obviously there's book plates. Obviously digital stuff's in there. All sorts of cool stuff that's going on with that. So there's 2 digital bundles. I think there's actually a third. So this is the first. Wow, I'm not really doing well here, am I?
No, you're good, dude.
So this is one. I might have already shown one. This is the regular hardcover. So you're just interested in the hardcover. That's this. Yeah. Then there's this, which is the bundle. Then there's the second bundle, which has a T-shirt in it. And does the second bundle have everything that the first bundle has plus the T-shirt, or are they different?
No, it's everything plus the T-shirt. Some people aren't used to
bundle 3.
That's the bundle 3. Yeah, that's the big boy bundle. That's got our fully loaded USB on it with all of our digital rewards that we offer in previous reward levels, but also a lot more. And the USB even has more stuff. We keep adding stuff to it, so it's going to be really, really loaded by the time this campaign's done.
And then this is just the print pack that I think you can add on.
Yep.
And then there's T-shirts. So obviously we only showed the first logo Fever shirt.
Yeah.
But then there's the Marcus, and we didn't talk about Tully because I don't want to ruin too much for this, purposely avoiding certain spoilers. But you could actually pick up some T-shirts. I think there's some face masks. Obviously, we don't really know where COVID's going. It could be gone tomorrow. It could stay for the next 10 years. But I think face masks, supposedly, I think, they're going to be here for a good another year. So
you might as well look stylish while you have to wear it,
Exactly. And then also, I know that you could add on a few other things, but one of the things that you could actually add on is this, hard drive or thumb drive. I guess it's called flash drive.
Yep.
It's right in front of me, and I'm terrible. I'm just terrible at this. So obviously, and then you're just adding a lot of stuff onto this.
And we have even more rewards coming. This week we're going to roll out a couple more. We want to do a few more that are Cyberpunk themed. So those will be dropping this week as well.
And then there's also this one too, where you could actually be drawn into it.
Oh yeah, if you want to be like gruesomely murdered in a cyberpunk city, this is your chance.
And so those are just some of the rewards. Obviously, I missed a bunch. There's a lot of stuff, and I'm pretty sure that people can pick and choose. Like you could add on a second soft cover if you want, and I know that some people, pick up books for other people all the time. I don't think anybody's been banned on a Kickstarter by you yet, so nobody has to go through a proxy per se at the moment. But that if you know somebody who's been banned, find somebody to do it and have them pick up something, for you. Just saying that there's ways around it.
Interesting enough, I've had a few people back the hardcover reward level and then go back and add on 2 to 3 of the soft cover ones. And I was like, holy cow. So maybe they're spreading the love.
Why do you think that, though? Because this is super interesting, because obviously I come from this from a very different angle, and I'm not as familiar with indie, but I know that people spec on certain things, and I've seen that being done in a lot of ways, where there are people, and I'm more traditional, and I'm starting to spec a little bit on indie books, but do you think that the people who are doing that are shop owners and they're trying to test the market? Do you think that they might just say, oh man, I have friends who are really into Cyberpunk 2077 and these are their birthday gifts or their Christmas gifts, or that, my kid is into this and I'm into this and I don't want him to read my copy? Or where do you think it's going? Because this is super interesting, because this isn't the first time I heard this.
It could be any of those. I'm not really sure. I'm not a big fan of the hardcover comic book. I'm old school. I like to just throw it in my backpack and take off. I usually get trades. They get beat up pretty much. My issues I collect, my trades are for reading, and they get beat up pretty bad. As far as people buying multiple copies, I'm not sure. We haven't loaded it yet, but we are going to have a retailer option as well. So that could be the case. People just putting them in shops, or hopefully people aren't buying them for their kids. This story is not for your children. I promise.
No, but it's the idea that my friends don't read comics.
Right.
And so the reason why I bring this up is that every once in a while I'll recommend a comic to somebody who's not a comic book fan, this is really good. This is really clever. This is really smart. Yep. Oh, I get why you recommended this to me now. I understand where I recommend certain book. I recommend Ready Player One to my friend. He's like, he hasn't read it, and it took him 6 months. He's like, now I see why you recommended it to me.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, and then we have that conversation and say, whenever I recommend something to you, am I wrong? He's like, no, you're not wrong, Andrew. And so there are certain people that I know that are going to appreciate this book and would enjoy it, but they're not comic book fans.
Right.
And so I'm super curious, because there are other things. Obviously, I don't know, do you know Travis Gibb?
Yeah.
So I've recommended Cthulhu Invades Oz to people. And they're not comic readers, but they enjoy The Wizard of Oz. They enjoy that type of concept. They're interested in Cthulhu stuff, and there you go. And so I've seen that happen a lot more with certain projects. And so I'm just super curious, because it is a very interesting project. Cyberpunk is bigger than ever at this point. Whether that's a phase or whether it's here to stay, I'm not exactly sure at this point, but definitely I think it's here for a little bit for the next few years. And obviously Cyberpunk 2077 really helped that.
Yeah.
And I think it brought in a lot of good stuff into that genre. I wasn't familiar with Cyberpunk until that. Yeah. So I am very new to Cyberpunk as an entity. I appreciate stories, because all Cyberpunk is that it's almost like an outer coating with certain traits on what are the core stories in many ways. You could take, legitimately, I make the joke that, I don't know if have you played The Godfather on the Nintendo Wii?
Oh my goodness. No, that's a little old for me.
So we're going old school, but it's an
Yeah.
open world Godfather game where you could
Yep.
legitimately take out the top bosses first and then work your way down. You can go and do things in any which way, and technically you don't have to beat the game. You could go start mob fights in the middle of the street if you want to and just screw around in the world. You could do that in Cyberpunk 2077.
Yep.
And that's what I find about your comic book, even though it's not, it's very much a free world atmosphere.
Now, something about Cyberpunk 2077. So I wrote, the way I write it, I plot everything out. I ended up plotting the entire series and writing the first 2 issues. Cyberpunk dropped, and I played, I think, 17 hours of it, and I had to stop playing it. I'm like, I don't want this game to influence what I'm doing over here, you know? And luckily for me, there were horrendous bugs, and it wasn't that much fun to play anyway. But my Cyberpunk is a different take on it. It's set in that world, but it's not a commentary on a technology yet. It's very.
My experience with Cyberpunk is that I beat the first 3 missions. Jackie is still alive in my game, and I am legitly explored the entire world of Cyberpunk and gone into new territory, legitly collecting weapons and having a blast, just screwing around, not even playing the missions and having fun in the game, and then killing people left and right. And that's what I've done for the last like 20 hours in the game.
Yeah,
I'm not even into like the main game yet. I legitimately have completed 3 missions because all I want to do is screw around in the game, and I'm like killing bad guys left and right and doing stuff and collecting money, and I have all this like crazy gear, and my levels are insane for accomplishing nothing.
jeez.
And it's the best experience I've ever had.
Yeah,
And it's amazing. It's the greatest way to play the game, because the second you do that is the second you have a lot more fun.
yeah.
I know what happens. I know exactly what happens, and the story doesn't interest me. The only thing I want is the golden baseball bat, which you get pretty much in the 2nd chapter of the game, to start to golden bash people's heads in. But I digress completely. It's a whole different experience with my experience. But obviously, those are the rewards and everything that's going on with that. And obviously, I am curious, actually, for my own personal knowledge, who's actually buying like duplicate books. Like, I would love to know about that. And that's a question I guess I'm posing to everybody who's watching this, is that if you buy double, trades and stuff, why are you buying it? Because this book doesn't seem like it would be that hard to reproduce into a second print run if it was super popular.
Right.
Versus other books like anthologies, which might be more understanding. So, like, I'm curious because I'm an investor. I'm a comic book investor. I buy a lot of comic books. I sell a lot of comic books. I purposely bet on certain books and other books, and I've done very well on that in the past few years. And so obviously I'm curious because I don't know too much about the indie side of things. So I'm curious about that. So I would love to know about that.
Well, yeah, and people who buy multiple trades, that's completely new to me. Like, I've never done that.
So my experience is that trade paperbacks and hardcovers only go up in value when they go out of print.
Yeah.
And there are Marvel books that are really hard to find in trade paperback.
Yep.
And they have slight damage, but they're going for like $50-$60 when they were a $20 book. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. Now, I like hardcover books because I like putting them on my bookshelf and I like staring at them. Yep. And I think they make an awesome backdrop, and that's my future one when obviously I get my own place again, is to have beautiful bookshelves behind me when I'm doing interviews because they make the nicest backdrop. Exactly, and especially if you have really nice hardcovers.
Yeah,
and beautiful art on the hardcovers. And so I just backed a book that has beautiful art on its hardcover, and it's going to be beautiful when you put it out on there, or if you have like a nice book that's being displayed. So I'm just curious about all that. That's just an interesting topic to me.
Well, another thing for me was I honestly can't remember another book that I've bought at a comic shop or comic book shop that had a variant cover for a trade. I know there are different versions of trades and different printings and stuff. So when we were doing or building up the Kickstarter page, I was like, can we do a variant for a trade? Like, is that feasible? As far as printing goes, because that's a whole nother hassle.
It's very new because Barnes & Noble does that.
Mm-hmm.
Certain shops do that. They have exclusives.
Yep.
So like, and they might have posters, or they might have other things. Or Barnes and Noble with Monstrous had, the creator had a special edition where it was signed exclusively for Barnes and Noble.
I've got it on my shelf. Yep.
And it's a beautiful book. It's like a hardcover, 18 issues, $50. It's got the postcards, it's got a print in it. It's a really cool book.
Yep.
And it was signed, and I believe Barnes and Noble that it's an authentic signature. I feel very comfortable with that, being done. And so obviously that's kind of what I view as things. But again, I think with like the Kickstarter stuff, it's really a new concept, having trade, variants for hardcovers and that stuff. I think that is new. And obviously I know a lot of other people who are doing it on Kickstarter as well. But I don't think that would have happened 3 years ago.
No. And that's why we decided we're going to play with it a little bit. We have one more variant that's being worked on now, and we're going to put that out. And then obviously other things like signed versions, fold-out posters, stuff like that. So just getting the logistics for all those done now, and hopefully getting them out this next week or two so we can hit that sweet Kickstarter lull spot.
And so I just think it's super interesting, and I'm avoiding a comment in the comments section purposely because I'm not too sure what the inside joke is. But I digress right there. I'm not going to say it purposely, unless you want to fill me in on the joke of this.
I have no idea.
I don't have any idea either, so somebody has to film me on this, because I am just as curious on this one. So if you want to fill us in, man, be my guest. But anyway, to talk about Kickstarter, because obviously crowdfunding has evolved.
Yeah,
I'm avoiding words. I'm avoiding words purposely. So obviously, how do you feel crowdfunding has evolved in the last year? Because with Keanu Reeves coming in, Boom Studio coming in, obviously Power Rangers is doing well, Charles Soule, Ryan Brown, Curse Words, and we spoke about this where all those people have raised a lot of money.
Yeah.
And also, and I don't know if you know this, but last year around this time, there were more projects on Kickstarter, and there was more funding on Kickstarter, and more projects were actually, doing better than they are right now, and the success rate was higher. Now, what does that exactly mean? Because does that mean that, well, somebody funded, but if there was less projects, they would have still funded, but they would have done 25,000 instead of 21,000? Well, I don't know how we're measuring those metrics, but nonetheless, collectively, the metrics were higher when there are more projects on. And as there's less projects on, the success rate is lower. And so where do you think crowdfunding is going? Because it's very, very interesting with those. And that came from Big Dog Inc., Tom Hutchinson. And so he actually gave me those statistics. And so I don't know where it's going, because I'm not a crowdfunder. I've never launched the Kickstarter. I could. I'm not ruling it out, but right now it's not the direction I'm going in. I have an idea, but obviously I'm not there yet. So from the inside looking out, where do you think it's going and it's evolved and all that stuff?
Last year in particular, I think there were just a lot more people at home. A lot of people consumed media last year. Digital, print, everybody, like we had our web store, we had a pretty good year last year. Our Comixology sales went up. It went from being a platform for people to get funding to create their projects to now a lot of people are using it as a business. I mean, you look at the Boom Studios stuff. You look at what Brian Polito's doing. I mean, that's a business he's built off of Kickstarter. It's in my opinion, it's got nowhere to go but up. And if it wasn't for Kickstarter, I wouldn't be doing any of this right now. It's just the way of the world, the way that the times have changed. I went putting a book together and trying to send it off to companies, rejection letter after rejection letter. And then I jump on Kickstarter, put a book out, and hey, here's companies interested in what I've got. I never would have dreamed when I wrote Rumble Kings #1 that I would have business meetings about multimedia options for my book. And that's all because of Kickstarter. unless some rich guy comes down out of his tower and throws $1 million at me and says, "Here, go wild, make your product." Kickstarter looks like where it's going to be at for a while.
And do you feel though that the market is getting saturated, or do you feel that it's not saturated enough? Because the entire thing with Keanu Reeves is that, and all these big names coming in, is that, well, they come in, they bring a lot of people into Kickstarter who are fans of those people, who then register, get an account, but also they suck out oxygen, and they also suck out attention, and it creates a double-edged sword in many ways. And I think this is one of the biggest issues right now with a lot of big names coming in, is that, well, all of a sudden, if now DC and Marvel come into Kickstarter, the little guy is going to get completely squeezed out. With Keanu Reeves or Boom Studios or other people coming in, or Brian Pulido, there's still room for the little guy. Yeah. But I think if all of a sudden there was 15 more Keanu Reeves coming in, there'd be less room for the little guy in there. And I think even though more names are coming in, legitimately all the attention is going to go to X, and then it's going to just suck out. And even all your fans, some of them are going to gravitate over. And then we were speaking about before about having, people are getting tapped now for money. I'm out of money on Kickstarter, everybody. Yeah. My plan was to back one project a month. And from January to this day today, which is May 3rd, I've backed 12 projects. And I backed $400 worth of projects. I'm happy with those projects. I'm going to be getting them hopefully in the next few months. I'm going to probably be getting about 3 or 4 in the next 6 weeks on those, and I'm happy about it. But I'm done for at least 2 or 3 months.
Let me put the question to you this way: did you back the Keanu Reeves project?
I didn't.
You didn't? Okay, can I ask you why?
I was just going to buy Berserk from my comic shop. Right. It was just easier, and I didn't really it didn't interest me, the story, actually. Right. It still doesn't interest me. Scott Snyder's Nocturne didn't interest me. I read it. I thought it was decent. I thought Berserk was decent, but I'm not like, go team, go. But also I view it very differently, where I knew both those books were overly saturated from investment positions. And so I have covenants placed in from a business perspective, yep, where when I'm buying comics and I'm buying other stuff versus a personal position, but I'm not the norm.
Right.
I'm very much the opposite of the norm.
For the Keanu Reeves project, I'll tell you, I did the exact same thing. I'm like, okay, this is great. I love this project. I'm a huge Ron Garney fan, so I was in from day one. But I knew it was coming to comic shops. I go to comic shops regularly anyway, so I'm just going to get my issues there. So the money that I would go to spend on a Kickstarter project, I could put that somewhere else. Obviously those guys don't need that money. Like I said, it's a business. Those guys are getting their money from Kickstarter to fund that project now instead of putting in the investment and waiting till later. I understand that. So for my case, it was, I can buy this project in my comic book store a few months later. It's fine. I spent that money on guys who were around my level. They're $15 issues or $20 issues. That's fine. But had that Berserker book not been a good looking book, I wouldn't have backed it anyway. As long as the book comes in and it's a great project, I'm going to back it. And I understand that you only have so much money to spread, around, but look at a Kickstarter project, for instance. You have 30 days to fund it. If it doesn't fund, it doesn't get made. The guys from Boom Studios and, like a Scott Snyder, those guys are going to get those books made eventually. I have no doubt that Nocterra was going to get done, no matter what. So I would rather spend my money on guys that I'm excited about in the indie community at my level, and let, the outsider people who don't normally go to comic book shops and who just see the buzz online gravitate and fund that book for those guys.
Fair enough. I mean, I didn't back it because I have personal covenants, and also my backing of Berserk was an afterthought. It wasn't a forthright thought. Yeah. And so I didn't wake up to, I'm going to back Berserk, and I didn't have it on my agenda in my comic shop. I wanted to having to buy bags and boards. I'm like, oh, I'll just add a bunch of these in there.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that expensive. That was my thought on it. I'm like, okay, so I'll take a look at it. And I enjoyed the story. Same thing with Nocturna, but I did pre-order Nocturna. But even still, I was like, wait a second, it's going to be cheaper anyway in a comic shop than it would be on Kickstarter.
Not only that, I feel like the Keanu Reeves situation, they're selling comic books to people who don't normally buy comic books. I've had people ask me about Kickstarter, like coworkers and friends that aren't into the pop culture and into comics, because they see me pushing Kickstarter. They don't know what it is. They're not interested, blah, blah, blah. They see Keanu Reeves is doing it. Hey, what's Kickstarter? Is there good stuff on there? There's more stuff like this. So I can see where they would bring attention to it. As far as them coming in and sucking all the air out of indie guys, I think it's a little bit early to tell right now.
I'm just looking at the bottom line.
No, I've heard it from both sides, and it's taken me a long time to decide, okay, which side of the fence do I fall on? I am glad that I waited to get the Berserker book in comic shops, only because if I go and drop $75 on these books and then they're terrible, I'm going to feel really bad about myself, because just like any other book, if I buy 1 or 2 issues and I'm not feeling the story, I'm going to stop supporting it,
Yeah, and my point that I'm getting at is that I agree that it might be a little too early, but I also am very much a contrary guy. I'm a contrary investor, and I also like to anticipate problems before they arrive. And look, I think more projects on Kickstarter, again, I don't have the metrics on how much more that funding was, because that's another issue where if we have 400 projects and the success rate is higher on that, but everybody's only funding $1,000 over their goal, when if there was less projects and that rate was 10% less, but everybody was funding $10,000 over their goal, those are two different metrics, but they have to be analyzed at the same time, because there's a big enough, I guess, delta that, I'll give an example. Let's say that Rumble Kings normally funds $5,000 over, but then all of a sudden there's 100 extra projects on Kickstarter and you only fund $2,500 over what you normally would do. You have to come to the conclusion that, well, either your writing sucks, the interest is lack of it, or there's more projects, meaning that people are backing it, but maybe they're not picking up a $30, they're picking up a $15. And there's a lot of people who are dividing their attention on 2 projects, and now that secondary project got funded, but you don't get to bring that extra $2,500 worth of value. Or what's happened to a lot of people is that normally they would fund in 20 days and they funded in 25 days. So it's taking them an extra time. And so that's a big issue. And I don't know what the exact metrics are on that. And I could be wrong, but that's what I've heard from people.
Well, and that's where it falls on us as creators and businessmen to make sure that we're doing the best for our project. If you're putting out a lackluster project, regardless of how many other projects are out there, you're going to fall by the wayside.
I also think that there needs to be, and I hate gatekeeping. I'm not a gatekeeping guy per se, but I also think that people have to just be aware of their community. And I think that's something that I see in Kickstarter, that I think a lot of people do not have education. And I also think that a lot of creators are oblivious to a lot of things. And I think that's starting to change, but I even see it in the comic book investing side and a variety of other stuff, that there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of lack of education, and there's a lot of problems that I think people are unaware of that are coming. And I think that as a community, I'm a podcaster. There are rules on podcasting. I'm a very active member in this, and I criticize certain things and certain practices because I want my community as a podcaster to be much better because of that. And it's up to me as that to do that. I'm a panelist at anime and Comic Cons. It's up to me as a panelist to have a certain standard and also get rid of bad actors per se. And that's how I feel about all of this, is that's kind of what needs to start happening, I feel. But again, I'm sort of speaking from what I see, what I hear, people I engage with, and what I'm just observing. And I could be completely blind because I'm looking in with knowledge of the inside versus actually being on the inside.
Yeah, no, I agree. Um, at the end of the day, though, you know, to use the old cliche, cream does rise to the top. You know, I know Kickstarter is a popularity contest to an extent. There will be subpar quality books that way overfund, and really good quality books that don't. Um, that just comes from your networking skills, your marketing skills, how you get out there, how you build your audience. At the level that we're at, it's all about building your audience. So the trick is to get that audience to follow you and move on, and to whatever new project you come upon. You know, like there are creators I follow that I found on Kickstarter that it doesn't matter what their project is. I know they're a good quality creator, and I'm going to enjoy their work, and I'm going to follow them wherever. You know.
Yeah, and there are people that I've just backed because of their name.
Yeah.
And I just know that they're going to produce good quality work. So obviously, it's a very interesting landscape, and I think that it's going to go through another evolution in the next year. Because obviously there was pre-COVID Kickstarter, COVID Kickstarter,
Yeah.
and then I think we're turning the corner here on COVID to some degree. I hope we are.
Yeah.
I don't think we're out of the woods yet, and I don't want to give that and say that this is, because I don't think it's over, but I think that obviously we turned a massive corner on it.
Well,
But
with more and more places opening up, people are going to want to be out. So I fully anticipate a dip in the amount of earnings that Kickstarter creators will have soon.
and even to add to that, because obviously I don't know how active you're on Facebook, but I am very much on Facebook on my personal page. Obviously, I see a bunch of Facebook ads, and I see cons are now advertising, saying, "Hey, we're back for this con on this date. Tickets are available now." We're running a small con here. We're running a project over here. I see comic shops advertising signings now and all sorts of stuff. And obviously, that's a sense of normalcy to return. Now, I don't know what that looks like. So I'm curious how you feel about cons returning, and because I think that's going to also affect Kickstarter, because now all of a sudden, people are going to want to go to conventions, and if a ticket costs $60 and you got to pay, for a hotel or parking or something of that nature, all of a sudden there's going to be a dip. Just because you're paying for something else. Money moves around.
Yep.
And then secondly, people are also going to be like, okay, cool, I'm at a con. I'm going to save up money. I'm not going to be back in this Kickstarter. Or, what is, maybe they say, hey, look, what is, I am going to, maybe if you have a Kickstarter currently running, you get a table at a con, you could get people to sign up right then and there. Maybe it's the opposite effect. But obviously that's going to throw a monkey wrench into things, I think. And obviously, so I'm curious where you even think cons are going to go as far as safety, because I don't think they're going to be the same as they were, and I think they're going to be very slow to return back to pre-COVID levels if they ever do. And then where do you think that's going to affect Kickstarter and even just indie comics, and what do you think we are going to have to do to adapt? Because obviously change is going to have to occur.
Well, and for conventions for Kickstarter creators, it's pretty much the same as it is for any other creator. I use my appearances at conventions and in stores at comic shops to promote. So I have, like right now, I have cards made up, promotional cards. I'm old school, I like flyers. So we pass them out like crazy at the tables and say, hey, okay, I understand you may have spent a couple $100 to get down here, get your hotel, blah, blah, blah. Here's my website where you can order my books, say later down the road. You don't have to spend it all right now. As far as conventions go, I started shying away from conventions, but pre-COVID anyway. The table prices were getting insane. It's a business, obviously they got to make money.
Let me ask you a question, because this is how I feel. I'm a panelist, not paid fan panelist. I get a free ticket. And my conversion rate at a con to get somebody to like my podcast, which is my first podcast, or get them to check out my website, or get them to check out my Facebook page, or even get them to take my business card, is extremely low. And while I like talking, getting somebody to take my business card, because I would then leave the room and I would see, if I handed out 125 business cards, I would see about 40 of them on the floor. Not even before I left the room. And I'm like, great. So I actually adapted and started handing out pins. Never
Oh, there you
saw
go.
one of my pins on the floor. It's awesome. I made a switch that one thing won't get thrown out, the other will.
Yeah.
So my pin has my name on it. Doesn't have my company name, but somebody can Google it and check it out, and it's going to pop up because it's a unique name. So what wound up happening is that I am at that stage where I'm like, am I ever going to go back to a Comic-Con?
Yeah.
Because I have more conversion rate here, and for $20 on a Facebook ad, I can get 25 to 45 people liking my Facebook page. I can actually send traffic to my website that's actually trackable traffic. I can install Pixel on, a variety of other things, and I can use a bunch of other metrics when I get back to doing that. So obviously that's how I feel, and that I'm at that question right now, and it's a very, very interesting situation for me because COVID has forced that on my end.
Yeah.
After being in the space for 10 years of doing panels and 50 of them. So I'm very much, it's a little bit different, but I understand the mentality of it.
But look where conventions are going now. Conventions are so far away from the comic creators that, it's almost like you got somebody who comes.
I'll ask the question that'll give us our answer. Who is the most important person at a con right now?
Oh, movie stars.
There's a wing, right? It's called Celebrity Wing, right?
Yep.
It doesn't matter. There are cosplayers who are more important than Scott Snyder, the guy who revolutionized Batman, and I think Batman was the best thing out of the New 52.
Yeah.
I think the guy who did Batman is more important. I do a comic book investing panel that legitimately gets people's wheels spinning on how to actually make money in comics. And the room is packed. People are there. They want to, and I'm actually trying to get people to save money and actually start thinking about investing in comics and actually know what they're doing. And we go through a very 101 basic crash course in 40 minutes. That should be the most important thing at the con. It really should be, because this is a way for legitimately people to figure out a way how to make their money back to their ticket in a very inexpensive way for free. And I'm not the most important person at a con. It's not highlighted, but the cosplayer who has a nice pair on her is. So go figure that one out. It's clearly something is broken in this.
Well, maybe next panel you wear a bra.
Exactly.
Just let the girls out. No, but I understand what you're saying. And that's a part where a creator, depending on your area of expertise, has to decide, okay, how do I pivot and move from here? Myself, I always saw way more traffic and I got more support from doing in-store signings at comic book stores, because that's where comic fans go. I go into a comic book store and I hear people talking about comic books most of the time. I don't want to sit at a con and try to flag down people who are going from one celebrity photo op to the next, or just buying, beautiful pinup art from an artist who is drawing Batman all day. I love Artist Alley. I love to talk to the artists. I love to talk to the indie artists, the writers that are there. But we're from a different cloth than the fan who just watched the new Avengers movie and is going and wants to just, meet the cast. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but for me personally, it's
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, but for me personally, I'm trying to push this to the part where, okay, I'm making a career out of this. And paying $500 for a table where I sit and watch people walk by me, regardless of whether I'm flagging them down, handing out free stuff, it's not a good business look for me. So coming out of COVID, I'll probably go to conventions as a fan, just hand out flyers or something. But as far as getting a table and signings and stuff, it's most likely just going to be, with the exception of maybe a con or two that I really love, it'll be all in stores.
So for me, my strategy, most likely, I'm taking some time off, and I'm not doing anything till 2022. Just because I'm in a rough situation, rebuilding my life, reestablishing myself. Obviously, I just moved back from living on my own to my parents. So I'm obviously reestablishing myself and shoring up my assets, which makes a lot of sense, which I think a lot of people are doing from an economic level. Yeah. COVID has wreaked havoc on people's economics, and I'm not broke. I'm not poor. I'm not in debt or anything, but my economic position is a lot shorter than it was a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
because of COVID and a variety of other stuff. So I'm shoring up my assets. So I don't really have much money to go at a con. And let's be realistic. At a convention right now, you need to have money to have a good time. It's an unfortunate reality. You know, I bring $1,000 to a con. I know people who bring $5 to $7 grand, where that's on a credit card, and they burn through it. I mean, I went to a con and I burned through $1,000 within 2 days, and everything in my budget was accounted for before. Not everybody's like that.
Yeah.
I'm very specific with my money, and I knew everybody's price beforehand, and I actually overestimated everybody's price, which was the best thing to do. Because then you're like, oh man, I thought you were going to be 300. You're only 200. That's great, because that means you acted appropriately. And then if you come back with $200 extra in your wallet from a con, you did something right. So that's all I'm going to say on my money advice here. You could take that however you want to take it, everybody. But the idea is that I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to 1 or 2 cons as well as a panelist, and I'm going to present the topics I want to talk about, whether that affects my business or not. But I don't have a desire, and also I'm not going 50 miles outside of where I'm centrally located either, because I don't really care. And the best part for me is I stream my stuff all over onto my pages, onto YouTube, and all over. And so at this point, and I've been doing that for years, that I've reached more people outside of a convention than I've ever reached people inside a convention. So that's how I feel about a lot of that stuff. And I won't make money at cons. I won't. It's unfortunate because I don't have the audience. Where I will make money is with other things, such as what I'm building with my comic book investing class, and the fact that I'm legitimately solving people's questions in a very, very conducive, smart manner, and that I'm pivoting, and I'm part of the great digitalization pivot. So that's where I'm at, and I think more, whoever figures that out and does it really well in the next 18 months, especially on Kickstarter, is going to make a lot of money in all of this.
Yeah, I've gotten way more fans and supporters off of my Kickstarters and my emails than I have at conventions. The biggest thing I saw from conventions when I would go and I would table, I'm like, hey, here's $400 or $500 for a table, and I'm trying to shop my book and my projects, and it was, oh, I've never heard of that. I'm like, oh, great, let me tell you about it. No, I'm not interested. I'm just like, wow, okay, that's fine. So it's basically, I spent more to go and table than I did to go as a fan, you know, and it wasn't, after the first 2, it just wasn't fun for me anymore. And I'm like, if I'm sitting here buying this table as a creator and I'm not having fun, how am I going to portray how fun my projects are to people, you know? And like I said, whereas where I go to a comic book shop, I will sit there and talk comics, you know, till the cows come home with people. And I've sold so much at comic book stores. You know, that's my people are in the store, you know, and I'm going to have so much more success there. So I see that's where my future will be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where my future is exactly, but obviously I am definitely going down a particular direction for a particular reason. I'm building out an entire comic book investing class, and I'm going to be changing the game, and it's going to be run like a college class. And ultimately, I do want to teach it out of college. That'd be the dream right awesome. There. And I wouldn't even do it for money. It's more of an ego thing because I want the clout that goes with it. Because you know, I love clout. You know, one day my dad went out for a bag of clout and he never came back. So there you go, right there. No, he's actually in the other room. I want to make that clear. That's called a joke. But on that note, obviously, I think we covered that pretty well. We covered Kickstarter, my 2 favorite topics. And so obviously, I want to give you an opportunity for self-promotion. So I've occupied a lot of your time. Hopefully, everybody's going to watch this and actually listen to it and share it. Because that actually does matter. It would make me very happy if we got a bunch of shares on this. But I digress again. Where can people find the Kickstarter? I know the link's up above in the description down below. And then obviously, where can people follow you? Where can people follow Skeletor Press, right? Or Skeletor Press? Yep,
Skeletal Press. Yep. All social media at Skeletal Press and our website at skeletalpress.com.
And obviously, as I stated before, Kickstarter link is up above. Obviously, there's a bunch of times to back it, but the earlier you back it, obviously you make Ryan a hell of a lot less stressed out.
Yes.
Also, I am going to say this just so everybody feels really bad. If you didn't back it on the first day, there was bonus items for the first day. So obviously that's something to keep in mind, that early backers do get advantages. And so that's something to keep in mind. So if you see something that was on the first day, well, you missed out on that, which is a good reason to back projects on the first day. Yep. So keep that in mind, and I am very excited for that hollow foil print, right?
Oh, yeah. I just got the proof in today, and it's gorgeous.
So if you didn't back it on the first day, that's your loss. So just throwing that out there, just to rub it in. But obviously, I digress right there, and I've been saying this. I said it the last time you were on. I'm gonna say it again. You got to support indie. What that means is that you have to back independent projects. You have to back Fever. It's currently on Kickstarter. It is super important. Best way how to support it is, as I just stated, by backing it. That means either picking it up digitally, picking it up in softcover, pick up a hardcover, pick up whatever you can. Digital is obviously less expensive. I think what is digital, like $15 standard?
The digital's 10, I believe. Is it 15?
Even better. I actually don't know it off the top of my head. So
I didn't even look at it today.
You should know it better than I do. It's your project.
I should.
I'm the interviewer here, okay? It's not my project. I have no stake in this. But obviously, it's relatively cheap. That the softcover standard is $25, variant's $35, and then the digital is significantly less. Yeah. So obviously, if you're tight for money, get it digitally. But if you're really tight for money, and I've been saying this with everybody, is that COVID, as I stated, I am shoring up a lot of assets. I am the first person to get it, where I have business interests to take care of. I have living things to take care of. I am worrying about, the next month and the month after. I'm also taking care of a variety of other things that are going on in my life at the moment, such as being an adult. So obviously, if you're in that situation where you do not have any extra money, please don't go into debt to back this project.
No.
Rather, you should be sharing it around. If you have friends who are interested in Cyberpunk stuff, or if you're part of a Cyberpunk group on Facebook, say, hey, it's a really cool Cyberpunk project that's going on. I don't know if anybody's interested. Hopefully it's okay to post it here, but this is still going on. It's about 20 days left or so. I'm giving you an example of the message thread. If anybody's interested, click the link and just check it out, because a lot of cool stuff's going on with it. Because sharing it can be very helpful, because if you share it in a group that has 500 people and then 17 people back it, but you couldn't back it, well, you just helped out that project more so than by you backing it and not sharing it. So please consider sharing projects. Obviously, follow people on social media, follow companies on social media, get on their email lists. Because that's also super helpful, because even if you don't share but you're on their email list, you'll be informed of every project, and hopefully the next Kickstarter that hits, you'll be in a better economic position to support it, especially if you like it. And obviously, I get that everybody's in rough financial situations, so that's all I have for that. But again, support indie in many ways, financially and social media wise. So please go do that, email lists as well. And on that note, I'm going to give you the final word.
The biggest thing you can do to help an indie creator is share the work. It takes 2 seconds. We're not asking for money. Share it. There are people out there who are more capable financially. Get it in front of them. You have friends and family, just share it, and we'll appreciate you for it.
Yeah. So share it and buy the merch.
And buy the merch, yeah.
And that's a wrap.